Hey guys, tonight we're drifting into a place where vegetables once grew on water, where the land wasn't land at all, but carefully crafted rafts of life. Imagine floating through a city of canals, where instead of sidewalks, you glide on narrow boats, and instead of skyscrapers, there are endless rows of maize and squash waving at the wind, rooted in something both ancient and handmade. We're talking about the Aztec chinampas, floating gardens that fed thousands. You've probably had a tough day. Maybe your inbox was cruel, or your neighbor chose 6 a.m. to play the drums again. But tonight, we're going to sink into something much softer, into warm lake air, into quiet green rows, into a world where tomatoes were sacred and lettuce had legal status. And let me tell you, if you had to live back then, you probably wouldn't last 5 minutes without sunscreen made of fish poop. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love imagining you all curled up across the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're drifting into the mists of Lake Xochimilco, long before Mexico City ever knew a car horn. The water glows a pale green, carrying the moon like a polished coin. Your little boat barely ripples the surface. Everything is quiet except for the soft splash of a paddle and the distant call of a night heron. To your left, a narrow rectangle of land floats. No, not floats like a raft with ropes and anchors, but hovers atop the water, thick with cornstalks that rustle gently. This is a chinampa, and tonight you're going to walk its edges. You hop off the boat with a soft thud. The ground gives slightly, spongy but stable. It smells like wet earth and crushed herbs. Beneath your feet is centuries of genius, an entire farming system built by hand, layer by layer, from mud, reeds, and dreams. This floating garden was no accident. The Aztecs engineered it like a cozy miracle. First, they wove rafts from junco reeds, light and strong. Then they piled on lake mud, mixed with decaying vegetation. Next, they planted willow trees at the corners, living anchors whose roots grew down to the lake bed. The result? A farm that didn't just float, it flourished. You reach down and touch the soil. It's black and silky, cool to the skin. Somewhere beneath this spot, someone 700 years ago might have dropped a broken ayless clay pot or a corn kernel meant for next season. Chinampas weren't just fields, they were family legacies. Now you hear it. A low hum, not bees, but a chorus of night farmers murmuring as they tend to their rows under moonlight. Their canoes are pulled up along the edge, each piled with baskets. In one there's amaranth, in another red chilies curled like dragon tongues. You wonder why they're working at night. The truth? Sunburns were brutal, and the moonlight was perfect for talking to the plants. Or so they believed. Some even say the maize listens better in the dark. You squat beside a row of tomatoes. They glisten like jewels, tight with juice. The Aztecs considered these fruits both food and medicine. You might think your grandmother's tomato sauce is sacred, but back then, people whispered to their produce and offered it incense. A sudden splash startles you. You turn. A frog the size of your hand is watching from the water's edge. Behind it, little fish flicker in and out of the shadows. These canals weren't just irrigation, they were ecosystems. They swarmed with tilapia, axolotls, and the occasional eel. You think, this is sustainable farming before sustainable was even a word. Zero waste, zero fossil fuels, and the only GMOs were, well, prayers to the rain gods. And yes, those gods were picky. Each garden had a tiny altar, often just a stone or a carved stick, dedicated to Tlaloc, the rain god with goggle eyes and a mustache made of clouds. If he liked your offerings, rain came. If he didn't, well, drought came, or worse, mudslides during weddings. Still kneeling, you notice something odd near the base of a stalk. a little amulet shaped like a frog half buried in the dirt. You brush it off gently. Maybe it's protection. Maybe someone dropped it while planting. Or maybe it's just the Aztec equivalent of losing your phone in the garden. The night deepens. Crickets begin to chirp in a rhythm that feels familiar, like the pulse of history itself. This place, you realize, isn't just a garden. It's a memory still breathing, one that floated when everything else sank. And yet, even today, some of these chinampas survive. Fragments, patches, forgotten lungs still feeding the city. Some people say they hear voices at night. Not spooky voices, just farmers chatting in Nahuatl, arguing about squash sizes and what time to harvest. You smile, you lean back, you breathe in the scent of wet earth and crushed marigold, and for a moment, floating there with the frogs and the stars, the modern world disappears. You wake slowly, but not because you fell asleep. No, you were just very, very still. So still that the reeds around the chinampa stopped whispering, as if respecting your quiet. But now a new sound nudges you back, a steady rustling, rhythmic and patient. It's not wind, it's work. You peek around a curtain of morning mist and see them, farmers knee-deep in water, hauling bundles of reeds, their hands caked with black lake mud. No alarms, no coffee, no traffic, just the squelch of footsteps and the groan of a canoe overloaded with plant life. These are builders of earth that floats. You tiptoe closer, careful not to startle anyone. Not that they'd mind, you're practically invisible here, like a whisper in a room full of memories. One man hums as he lays down a fresh layer of tule reeds. Another follows behind, slathering thick mud from the bottom of the canal, smearing it like icing across a birthday cake made of vegetation. This is how chinampas begin, not with grand ceremonies or government permits, but with rhythm and repetition. They don't build from above, they build from beneath. The roots of this process go back hundreds of years, possibly longer, even before the Mexica, who you know as the Aztecs, ruled from their shimmering capital Tenochtitlan. People here had already begun coaxing the lake into something livable. The lakes gave fish, yes, but they also gave problems, like flooding and mosquitoes. So why not just plant the lake? Simple enough, right? Just shovel mud onto some sticks and boom, salad. Except you try it. No, really. You imagine yourself knee-deep in sludge, weaving together bundles of water plants so they don't float away. You balance mud on top like a kid stacking too much peanut butter on a slice of toast. Then you lug willow saplings to the corners and hope they root before the whole thing drifts away like an untethered thought. It's no small feat, but these farmers, they're artists. Every move is practiced. A pair of hands sets down a stone at just the right edge to weigh a corner. Another scoops canal fish droppings. Yes, you heard that right. To enrich the mud with nutrients. You watch a teenage boy, probably no older than 16, tie reeds into a grid pattern with river grass rope. He pauses, wipes sweat from his brow, and then smiles faintly when a duck swims by, trailing 6 fuzzy ducklings like a tiny, fluffy parade. He's probably thinking what everyone here knows: this isn't just a garden. It's a promise. A living pact between humans and water. And what they create? It works. The soil never dies. As the seasons turn, crops cycle smoothly. Maize to beans, beans to squash, squash back to maize. Each root leaves behind what the next needs, like good roommates sharing groceries. They even plant flowers, cempasúchil, golden marigolds, as markers and gifts to the gods. But it's not just farming that happens here, it's invention. Even the Spanish were baffled when they arrived, muttering about floating fields, like they'd discovered Atlantis. There's a story, half history, half gossip, about one of those Spaniards falling into a canal, trying to measure a chinampa. He thought it was magic, or a trick, or both. His armor clanked, his beard got muddy, and the locals laughed until the fish swam away. The truth? No spells, just patience, physics, and lake gunk. Still, something about the place does feel enchanted. Maybe it's the way the air hums, thick with pollen and fog. Maybe it's the green-on-green landscape where the horizon vanishes into corn stalks. Or maybe it's because nothing here ever really dies. It just gets composted. You sit down on a half-finished chinampa. It sways slightly beneath your weight, but holds you like a hammock made of the earth itself. Around you, bundles of tule sway in tidy stacks. Birds call out as if checking attendance. One lands near your feet, a grackle, shiny and smug. It looks at you. You look at it. It poops. Welcome to the cycle of life. Just as you're brushing that off your shoe, an older woman nearby chuckles. She's carrying a basket full of lake mud, her hair tied in a cloth the color of the setting sun. She catches your eye and shrugs with a smile that says, "You'll learn." The morning air thickens with the scent of warm earth and breakfast fires. Somewhere across the canal, a pot of maize porridge is bubbling, and your stomach rumbles with the memory of food you've never eaten. As the sun rises higher, the farmers begin to pack up. They'll return tomorrow or tonight, or whenever the moon tugs them back. For now, the Chinampa is reborn, just a bit longer, a bit wider, a bit richer than before. And just as you're about to return to your little boat, you notice something. A line of tiny green shoots pokes out of the new soil. Just planted, just reaching. Someone's future beginning to grow. No monument, no fanfare, just a few brave leaves and a lot of mud. And somehow that's enough to make you smile. You paddle away slowly, thinking about how something so wet, so messy, so quietly brilliant could have built an empire. And the only thing you need to make it work is to keep floating. The next time you drift past the Chinampas, the sun is lazily crawling across the sky, yawning golden rays over the water. You squint just a little, and the whole scene shimmers like someone spilled warm honey on a mirror. You're back, and the gardens have changed. Now they're awake. Chilies dangle like little flames from their branches. Beans wrap around maize stalks in a tight embrace, like best friends sharing gossip. Squash vines snake across the beds with a kind of smug entitlement. Clearly, they think they own the place. And in some ways they do. You hop off your canoe again, now a familiar friend, and kneel in the soil. It's still cool, still breathing, but something's different today. The mud feels thicker, richer, like it's been stirred by invisible hands. Then you see her, a woman with arms like tree branches and eyes sharper than obsidian. She's carrying a basket filled not with vegetables, but with, well, you're not quite sure. It's a mix of old maize husks, fish bones, crushed snails, and wait, is that human hair? No, not in a creepy way. You inch closer and catch the smell. Earthy, fermented, slightly metallic. She's making compost, Aztec style. And trust me, you've never seen compost like this. This isn't the throw it in the bin and forget it kind. This is sacred alchemy, a recipe passed down through generations, fine-tuned by observation, by ritual, and sometimes by mistakes, like the time someone added chili too early and accidentally scared off all the worms. Yes, that happened. The worms never came back. Still offended, the woman hums as she layers the muck into a mound near a young willow. She pats it down gently, like tucking in a child, and then sprinkles water from a calabash gourd. You watch, hypnotized. This compost is the heart of the Chinampa. It keeps the soil fertile season after season, crop after crop. And the weird part? It never runs out. Why? Because the Aztecs didn't see waste the way we do. To them, everything was part of a cycle. Fish guts, broken pottery, even ashes from the kitchen fire, all fed the land. Nothing was useless. Nothing was too small. You walk a bit further, past rows of amaranth, its ruby red stalks swaying like tall dancers. This wasn't just food. It was currency, religion, and rebellion. Some emperors banned it, some worshipped it. You run your hand along the leaves. They feel soft, like velvet soaked in sun. Suddenly, you hear laughter. Two children pop up from Behind a mound of maize, their hands covered in dirt, their cheeks smeared with squash pollen. One of them holds a doll made of corn husks, her tiny face drawn in charcoal. The other? He's got a stick shaped like a jaguar tooth. You think he might be the villain in this game. They run off again, disappearing between rows. You follow their footprints, noticing small signs of life: a half-buried gourd, a stone knife left in the shade, a set of sandals hung carefully on a branch. Someone lives here, maybe many someones. This isn't just farmland, it's a home. You step into a shaded patch where the maize grows thicker. There's a small altar, just a flat rock with petals arranged in a spiral. At its center, a clay figurine with exaggerated eyes and a wide smile, possibly a deity, or maybe a prank. It's hard to tell, but you feel something here, the kind of quiet that only comes when generations agree to protect a place. Then, a breeze carries a new scent, smoke and lime. You follow your nose and find a small outdoor kitchen where tortillas are being flipped over a clay comal. A young girl, no older than 10, waves at you. She has a mole-smeared apron and a grin too wide for her face. She offers you a tortilla, hot from the pan, and you don't hesitate. One bite and you're sold. It's slightly sweet, earthy, and completely alive. This isn't fast food. This is first food. Food that's tasted like this for centuries. You nod in thanks. She nods back, then turns away to grind more maize by hand, humming softly. The grinding stone she uses is called a metate, and it's older than most civilizations. The rhythm is timeless. Rock against rock, flesh against grain, silence against story. As you chew, you notice someone sketching nearby with charcoal on bark paper. It's an older man, seated cross-legged, capturing the shape of a chinampa with steady lines. He's labeling the parts, carefully noting the crops and canal depths. His notes aren't just for him, they're for the next farmer. And the next. You realize this isn't casual agriculture. It's a system, a science. There's math in the spacing of maize, chemistry in the compost, astronomy in the timing of crops. And beneath it all, a deep, almost spiritual faith in the Earth's ability to renew itself. You sit in the dirt for a while, just breathing. You hear dragonflies buzz past, chasing invisible dreams. You hear a frog belch somewhere under the reeds, undoubtedly proud of himself. You hear a paddle slap the water in the distance, returning from another chinampa. And you think, if more of the world farmed like this, maybe we'd all sleep a little easier. Maybe the land would forgive us more often. Maybe even the worms would come back. The wind picks up slightly as you push off from the chinampa, your canoe slicing the water like a slow thought. You're not in a rush. The sun has moved to that sweet spot, high enough to warm your shoulders, low enough to not fry your brain. Today, you're headed towards something a little louder, a little grander, the city. But not just any city, Tenochtitlan, the crown jewel of the Aztec world. And if you've ever imagined ancient cities as dusty ruins or sand-covered stones, well, buckle up. This place is going to ruin your expectations forever, because Tenochtitlan, it's floating, not entirely, of course. Don't picture Venice. With sombreros, but built on a series of small islands in the middle of Lake Texcoco, laced with canals, connected by causeways, and buzzing with canoes instead of carts. As you paddle closer, the water begins to shimmer with reflection. Tall temples rise in the distance, jagged against the soft sky. Between them, rows and rows of chinampas continue to stretch, like green fingers reaching into the lake's mirror. You pass other canoes along the way. One carries a baker with fresh tlaxcali, flatbreads, piled in a cloth. Another is loaded with flowers, bright orange cempasúchil blossoms, probably on their way to a market or an altar. A third, it's just a kid and a very lazy dog. The dog yawns as you pass. He's clearly not impressed by your paddling form. And then you arrive. The edges of Tenochtitlan are laced with bustling docks, canoes tied side by side, Traders shouting greetings, guards nodding to familiar faces. You step onto a wide plank and immediately feel it underfoot. Stone, solid, sun-warmed, neatly placed, and surprisingly clean. Because, fun fact, Aztec streets were immaculate. City workers swept them daily. You might even trip over a feather if you're not paying attention. But dirt? Never. The gods were watching, and they hated mess. You follow a canal road into the city. On either side, buildings made from volcanic stone rise 2 or 3 stories tall. Colorful murals cover the walls, some showing legends, others just proud. Depictions of corn or frogs. You pass a school where young nobles learn math, law, and the exact right way to wear a headdress. Spoiler, it's all about angle and attitude. And then you see the market. It's enormous, like you thought your local supermarket was busy enormous. The Tlatelolco market is a humming, pulsing sea of people, vendors shouting over fruit piles, artisans showing off obsidian blades, spice sellers fanning their stalls with woven palm leaves. Somewhere, someone's arguing passionately about the price of a cactus. You wander into a section selling chinampa produce. You recognize the layout immediately. Neat stacks of maize, tomatoes, squash, beans, chilies. But here, they're polished, arranged with artistic pride. Each tomato is turned to its most charming angle. Each chili curved like a dancer mid-spin. Next to the vegetables, someone is selling flower bouquets for offerings, marigolds, lilies, and even wild orchids. A sign, painted on bark paper, advertises them as fresh enough for Tlaloc, a bold claim, but don't worry, there are jokes here, too. One vendor sells tiny corn sculptures labeled, "For your mother-in-law." Another offers angry gourds with faces carved into them. A small boy walks past trying to balance 6 avocados on his head. He succeeds for about 5 steps before disaster strikes. You pretend not to see. Everyone does, and then, like a pull in your chest, you're drawn toward the center of it all, the Great Temple, or Templo Mayor. It looms over the city like a mountain made of intention. Twin staircases lead up to shrines for Tlaloc and Huitzilopochtli, gods of rain and sun, water and war. The colors are still vibrant, reds like ripe pomegranate, blues like lake mist. People bustle around the base, but you keep a respectful distance. The rituals here are, let's just say they're not for bedtime stories or stomachs. Instead, you wander behind the temple and stumble across something surprising. Another chinampa, hidden in the heart of the city. It's smaller, nestled in a courtyard, but perfectly formed. A willow bends overhead, casting ripples of shadow across maize stalks, and a neat row of chaya, a leafy green with the flavor of spinach and the sass of chili. You kneel beside it and touch the soil again. Same softness, same breath, same memory, and you think this is the secret. Not the temples, not the wars, not even the markets. The real power of Tenochtitlan is that it grows. It turns lake into food, mud into beauty, time into meals. That's how you feed. A city of over 200,000 people, with chinampas, with hands, with a quiet agreement between water and willpower. And as you walk back to your canoe, the sun just beginning to dip below the volcanoes in the distance, you think, who needs empires that stand tall when you can build ones that float? The light is softer now, stretching gold across the water like melted butter. You're drifting again, canoe slicing between the narrow channels of chinampas. But this time, you follow your nose, because something's cooking. You glide around. A gentle bend, and there it is. A modest open-air market floating gently on wooden platforms tethered together with thick vines and anchored by willow trunks. This isn't like the grand bustle of Tlatelolco. No formal stalls, no guards with sharp cheekbones and sharper spears, just neighbors, food, and fire. You paddle up and tie your canoe next to a floating stall. A grandmother with hands like woven. Mats hands you a folded leaf. You open it carefully. Inside, a steaming tamal, fresh corn mesa filled with squash blossoms, spiced beans, and the faintest kiss of chili and cocoa. Not sweet, not spicy, just right, just ancient. You nod in thanks, mouth too full to speak. She cackles approvingly and slips another into your pocket for later, or in case of a flavor emergency. Around you, food is everywhere. There's a man tending to a clay pan of roasted chapulines, grasshoppers, crisp and lemony. Don't flinch, they're delicious. There's a woman arranging small pyramids of nopal cactus pads, each glistening with dew and neatly trimmed. And further down, a teenage boy balances a net of axolotls, those smiling, frilly-gilled salamanders, ready to be smoked, dried, or traded. Yes, axolotls were food too. Don't tell your biology teacher. You wander through this watery market, and the smells swirl: wood smoke, honey, crushed herbs, fermented maize. Somewhere, someone is baking amaranto bars with wildflowers and agave syrup. A child walks by gnawing on a roasted maize cob the size of your forearm. This place isn't just about sustenance, it's about ritual. A woman in embroidered cloth is arranging offerings at a floating altar: maize cakes shaped like stars, cacao nibs, and a small bird figurine sculpted from dough. She places a marigold beside it and whispers something to the canal, as if sending a voicemail to the gods. This is how food moved in the Aztec world. From garden to canoe to gods to gut, every step sacred, every ingredient aware. You pass by a man grinding seeds with obsidian stones. He looks up, eyes twinkling, and points to a bowl of green paste. He hands you a leaf, gestures for you to dip it. You do. It's tangy, herbal, and faintly numbing. Episode, he mumbles, for the belly. And the ancestors. You nod, although your tongue is tingling. He grins. Nearby, a woman fans a small clay grill. On it, slivers of smoked turkey, marinated in lake herbs, a delicacy reserved for nobles or traders lucky enough to have something rare, like obsidian from the north or feathers from the south. Feathers, yes. Don't laugh. In this world, food wasn't just eaten. It was currency, diplomacy, and devotion. Some things were taxed in cacao beans, others in maize baskets, and certain rare foods, like bright red chili paste or pumpkin seeds, could win you favors, wives, or forgiveness. One old man in the corner is selling little scrolls of dried herbs, remedies, and recipes. He lifts one labeled, "For Talking," to plants. Another reads, "For listening to fish." You smile. He's probably joking. Probably. Suddenly, there's a cheer from the center raft. A tall young woman, maybe a priestess in training, is demonstrating how to wrap maize leaves into floating lanterns. She lights one, murmurs a blessing, and releases it into the canal. It glides slowly, casting ripples of light. All around her, others do the same. Within moments, the water glows with drifting fireflies made of food and prayer, and now you understand something you didn't before. These chinampas didn't just feed stomachs, they fed stories. Each crop had a tale, each dish had a myth. Each bite was a memory stitched into the body of a civilization. You sit at the edge of a floating platform, feet dangling into the water, and sip from a clay cup someone handed you without asking. It's pulque, fermented agave sap. Slightly sour, slightly sweet, slightly dizzying. A dragonfly lands on your knee. You think modern menus could never compete with this. And as the stars begin to bloom overhead, you hear the murmur of musicians. Reed, flutes and hollow drums coming down a canal. They're playing something slow and circular, a melody that never quite ends. It's the sound of cycles, of harvests, of returns, of floating. And you float too, full, glowing, and just a little tipsy. Because tonight, the chinampas aren't just farms, they're feasts. The morning is damp with dew, and everything smells a little like wet stone and cooked maize. You paddle again, this time slower. The canals are quiet now, wrapped in a fog so thick it feels like the air itself has secrets. You hear laughter, high-pitched, chaotic and entirely unbothered by the ancient weight of history. children. You round a bend and find them, a band of Aztec kids, maybe 6 or 7 in number, half-dressed, half-drenched, and entirely delighted with the universe. They're chasing each other barefoot along the narrow, muddy banks of the Chinampas, screaming in Nahuatl and splashing water everywhere like it's their job. You pause your canoe and just watch. One child holds up a mud-covered squash like a trophy. Another is trying to bait a duck with what appears to be a stolen tamale. The duck is not impressed. Here, in the fields that fed an empire, children aren't only playing, they're training, because in the Aztec world, even childhood had a purpose. It wasn't grim or strict, but it was intentional. By the age of 5, many kids had chores, watering maize, gathering herbs, even helping with the daily offerings, not as punishment, but as introduction. This is how we live. This is how we grow. A girl, maybe 10 years old, stands with perfect balance on a canoe edge, tossing seeds into a freshly turned row of earth. She does it like a ceremony, like she knows every angle of her wrist matters. You watch, and you wonder, when did we stop? Trusting children with real things, another group nearby is collecting fish eggs from the water's edge using thin reeds and baskets. They joke as they work, occasionally flicking water at each other, but they never drop the eggs. These are destined to feed the ducks, who will then fertilize the water, which will then feed the plants. It's all part of a circle, and the children, they're in it too. A small boy trips and face plants into a wet patch of earth. His friends pause, stare, and then laugh so hard one of them falls backward into the canal. Neither cries, no adults. Rush over. A few ducks clap their wings like annoyed parents, but otherwise, the kids pull each other up and carry on, now soaked and twice as muddy. You walk along the edge of the Chinampa, careful not to fall into the soft, waterlogged bank. There are little footprints everywhere, some recent, some already crusted dry. One of the kids runs past and drops something near your foot. It's a clay whistle shaped like a frog. You pick it up and blow gently. It croaks. The child spins around, points at you, and declares you an honorary frog. The others agree. It seems official. One of the older kids calls everyone to a low platform nearby. A teacher, barefoot, robed in dyed cotton, waits by a reed mat, a bundle of corn husks in his lap. This is Kamakak, a place of learning, no desks, no chalkboards, just stories, symbols, and the sound of wind moving through maize. The children gather around, hush themselves, barely, and listen as the teacher begins to sing. The song isn't melodic in the way you expect. It's rhythmic, rising and falling like the paddle strokes of a boat. You don't understand the words, but the kids do. Their eyes are wide, their backs straighten. One little girl begins mouthing the words as if she's singing along in her head. You later learn it's a song about Chicomacoatl, the goddess of agriculture and sustenance. A reminder that the food they help grow isn't just for bellies, it's for balance. The kids begin to recite the names of plants in Nahuatl, clapping in rhythm. You recognize a few. Zeluk Xochitl, the flower used to dye fabrics, red. Ahuautli, the waterborne grain that looks like foam. Zacatl, grass, sacred and everywhere. The teacher passes out tiny scrolls of bark paper, each painted with a plant. The children will memorize these, draw them again, and then help plant them by evening. And yes, there's play. But here, play and purpose are siblings. By mid-morning, the children return to the canals, some to help their parents, some to gather firewood, some just to paddle around and see who can get the most soaked. Spoiler, it's the same kid with the duck-taming tamal. He's now also lost a sandal. And you? You sit by the edge, clay frog whistle in your hand, and feel something rare. Hope. Not big billboard-style hope, but small, green shoot hope. The kind that grows when children learn not just from books, but from mud, from mistakes, from ducks who refuse to cooperate. You lie back on the grass, feel the hum of insects, the chatter of young voices, and the occasional slap of a paddle on water. And you realize, even in a world ruled by emperors and gods, it's the muddy, giggling feet of children that keep the earth spinning. By now, the sun is high enough to start asking difficult questions like, "Did you bring water?" And "Why are you wearing black?" But the farmers don't flinch. They just lift their woven baskets, tie their hair tighter, and get to work. Today, you're walking behind one of them. She's older, perhaps 60. But her stride is quick and her back doesn't bend. Her hands are dark with sun and soil, and her shawl is patterned with maize stalks, hand-dyed in deep indigo. You follow her as she steps confidently along the soft edge of a chinampa, avoiding the mud with the precision of someone who's been doing this longer than most buildings have existed. She's not alone. Around her are dozens of women tending crops, carrying bundles of wood, scattering crushed shells along paths to prevent erosion. One stirs a clay pot bubbling with beans and wild herbs. Another hums while planting rows of chili peppers, each seed pressed lovingly into the earth like a promise. And here's something you might not have heard before. Women were the architects of everyday abundance. Sure, the emperors got the statues, the warriors got the feathers, the gods got the pyramids. But women got the beans to boil, the maize to sprout, and the tortillas to not stick to the comal. You kneel near one of them, a teenage girl wrapping tamales in maize leaves that still smell like sun. She shows you her method, a precise fold, a pinch of filling, and a small clay stamp pressed gently into the top. A flower, a sun, a spiral, each one unique. Why the stamps? To tell them apart, she says, grinning. Mine are always the best. Another group of women is walking toward a floating kitchen, each carrying a different ingredient. One has a net bag of nopal cactus, another holds a bowl of crushed cacao, and the third carries a water jug balanced on her head like it's the easiest thing in the world. They chat as they walk, stories about dreams, jokes about husbands, predictions about the next rain. When they reach the platform, they fall into rhythm without needing to speak again. You watch as they cook. One roasts squash seeds with salt and chile. Another grinds ipazot and garlic into a green paste. A third flattens masa dough into circles as perfect as the moon. A small fire crackles beneath the comal. The smell rises. You try not to swoon. The older woman you followed earlier returns with a handful of wild mushrooms, damp from the morning mist. She kneels and adds them to the pot, stirring with the kind of care you usually reserve for fragile secrets or very spicy salsa. She looks up and says simply, "Food is the beginning of everything." You believe her. Near the edge of the chinampa, another woman tends to flowers, not just for beauty, but for medicine, for ritual, for trade. Mexican marigold, wild dahlia, cempasúchil, each one bright and precise like sunbursts captured in petal form. She pauses and points to one with silvery leaves. For childbirth, she says softly, and for memory. You realize that these floating fields aren't just feeding mouths. They're supporting entire systems of care, of healing, of culture. Even the design of the chinampas, the spacing between rows, the order of crops, was often managed by women. Their knowledge passed down not through scrolls, but through fingers and songs and long, humid mornings. And just when you think you've seen everything, one woman gestures you over to a small clay oven. She opens the lid and reveals dessert, sweet, corn cakes filled with agave syrup and sprinkled with crushed amaranth. Still steaming, still soft, still maybe the most glorious thing you've seen all day. You bite in. It's warm, slightly sticky, and somehow tastes like sunshine remembered. The woman pats your arm. "My grandmother made these when she was tired," she says. "Because they're light. You eat them and feel like you're floating." You nod, eyes half closed, mouth full. That tracks. You sit there for a while, surrounded by laughter, the sound of grinding stones, the flapping of herons, and the occasional splash of someone falling into a canal again, and you think empires are built on decisions, but they're held together by quiet labor, by calloused hands and shared recipes and women who know that growing something well is a kind of worship. So when you leave the Chinampa, full and humbled, the women wave. One tosses you a tamal, another blows you a kiss. And the eldest? She just winks, like she knew you needed this. Night again, but this time it's different. The moon is a silver coin caught between the reeds, and the stars blink with the lazy rhythm of someone nodding off mid-sentence. You drift silently between the Chinampas, breath slow or barely skimming the surface, and then you see him, a figure moving along the edge of a garden, not working, not harvesting, just creeping. You hold your breath. The water feels colder suddenly, the air tighter. The man ducks behind a tree, then makes a slow dash across a muddy path. His arms are full, squash blossoms, a bundle of amaranth, even what looks like a baby duck struggling in his poncho. You stifle a laugh. Even the duck seems annoyed. You've found him, a Chinampa thief. Yes, they existed. Even in a world of shared labor and sacred corn, people sometimes took more than they gave. Maybe for survival, maybe for mischief, maybe because they just really loved someone else's beans. But stealing from a Chinampa wasn't like stealing from a stall in the city. Here, it was personal. You follow at a safe distance, canoe tucked in the shadows, watching this mud-slicked bandit skitter between willows. Like a ghost in sandals, suddenly he stops. He kneels, not to rest, to light a candle. Wait, what? You edge a little closer, careful not to make the water slap. He pulls something from his poncho, not a weapon, not a bag of stolen goods, but a bundle of feathers and maize wrapped in cloth. He lays it gently on the ground next to the candle. He hums, low and sad. Oh, this isn't theft. It's a ritual. He speaks softly in Nahuatl to someone you can't see. Maybe a god, maybe a ghost, maybe a grandmother. He scatters the amaranth, places the squash blossoms in a circle, and lets the duck go. It waddles off in confusion, clearly regretting its evening choices. And you understand. This man isn't robbing the Chinampa. He's repaying it. Maybe he harvested too soon or without asking the proper spirits. Maybe someone died, and he's returning the food borrowed for mourning. Or maybe, just maybe, he's following an old secret tradition that says, every hand that takes must also give. You exhale. The tension slips away like a reed in current. You drift closer and see the final touch. A small mask made of clay, the size of a plum, placed gently into the soil. Its face is smiling or grimacing. It's hard to tell in the candlelight. The man bows low, presses his forehead to the dirt, then disappears into the mist like a whisper swallowed by water. You paddle forward and stop at the little altar. It's humble, muddy, unremarkable by city standards, but it hums like it knows something you don't. This wasn't an isolated act. Across the Chinampa world, there were rituals hidden beneath routine. A bundle of maize left at the base of a tree, a frog whispered to before rain, a handful of salt tossed into the canal for luck. The Aztecs didn't separate farming from faith. They didn't call it superstition or habit. They just lived inside the story. Even crime, even guilt, even grief had a shape in this system. A time, a rhythm, a ceremony. You reach down and press your fingers into the same soil. Man knelt on. It's warm, slightly sticky. You feel invited. Then, from behind you, something splashes, loud, too loud. You spin, heart skipping a beat, expecting a god or a guard or an angry duck. It's none of those. It's a child, eyes wide, drenched head to toe, holding a floating lantern made from maize husk and beeswax. The candle inside is still lit. She stares at you. You stare at her. Then, without a word, she places the lantern in the canal and gives it a push. It floats, soft light reflecting off the water. bobbing between lily pads, and the hush of crickets. She disappears into the darkness just as quickly as she came, leaving behind only that little globe of flickering gold. You sit in your canoe for a long time, watching it drift. It makes no sense, and yet it makes perfect sense. In this world, even stealing could be sacred. Even mistakes could be woven back into harmony. Even you, out of place, out of time, have a role. And as you float beneath the stars with only the soft glimmer of the lantern for company, you feel something new, not like a guest, but like a participant. The sun rises slow today, yawning over the horizon with a sleepy orange grin. Your paddle dips quietly in and out of the water as you follow a scent that winds through the mist like a ribbon: smoke, herbs, and something faintly sweet. Grilled fish and squash syrup. You follow your nose to a clearing between chinampas. There, under a canopy of reeds, a long reed table has been set. Stone plates, woven mats, gourds filled with pulque, and sitting cross-legged at one end looking equally bored and hungry is a nobleman. You've arrived at a feast, but this isn't your average banquet. No pyramids, no trumpets, no parades. This is something quieter, a sacred meal prepared, not for show, but for the gods and their favorite humans. You glance around and notice the careful balance. On one side, priests in modest robes arranging flowers and crushed cacao in spiral patterns. On the other, a cook wiping her hands on her tunic, muttering about how the turkey should have been marinated longer, if we're being honest. The nobleman sighs deeply. Apparently, even in ancient times, VIPs waited on food. A young girl approaches the table with a basket of blue corn tortillas. Yes, blue. The Aztecs had maize in more colors than your printer has ink: yellow, red, white, purple, and even black. Each color with its own symbolism and sometimes its own deity. Today's tortillas are blue for Chalchutlacu, goddess of lakes and streams. Fitting, given how much of your journey has been spent with your shoes wet. One by one, the dishes arrive. A tola thick with amaranth and honey, tlacoyos stuffed with mashed beans and avocado leaf, stewed squash flowers, served in bowls lined with banana leaves, and in the center of the table, the crown jewel, axolotl roasted in lake herbs. Yes, it's the smiling amphibian again. You wince slightly. He was adorable. He was also apparently delicious. But this isn't just dinner, this is diplomacy. Each dish chosen for its meaning, each guest selected for a reason. You eavesdrop, respectfully, of course. The nobleman is talking about trade, how many sacks of cacao it takes to secure a canoe of obsidian blades. The priest chimes in with a story about a god who once turned into maize just to flirt with a farmer. Someone laughs. Someone else immediately begins sketching the story on a palm leaf. Then a new dish arrives and the room hushes. Tamal de luna, moon. Tamal. It's a ceremonial food, steamed inside a squash blossom, flavored with wild honey, and only served during specific lunar alignments. You sneak a bite from a nearby plate. It tastes like dusk and starlight. The priest rises. Everyone follows. A bowl of cacao is passed around, thick, unsweetened, spiced with chili and something sharp, maybe allspice or sorrow. The priest holds it up and speaks in Nahuatl. To the land that feeds us, to the gods that see us, to the hands that make food more than survival. Everyone drinks. You do too. It's intense, bitter, but it warms your ribs like a small sun. After the toast, the mood softens. Someone starts drumming on an overturned gourd. Another hums a lullaby that turns into a chant. No one dances, but they all sway, like corn stalks in wind or memories in sleep. You sit at the edge of the feast and take it all in. The ritual of nourishment. The belief that food is a bridge not just between stomach and satisfaction, but between people and gods, soil and sky, past and present. Here, nothing is just something to eat. That tortilla, a map of the seasons. That cacao, a bitter truth. That roasted fish, a symbol of a dream a god once had during a drought. Even the way they chew feels meaningful, slow, reverent, grateful. You glance down at your own hands, mud under the nails, smell of smoke on your sleeves. You've been here long enough to be part of the rhythm. The feast welcomes you, not as a guest, not anymore, but as someone who understands what it means to eat with purpose. And just as you reach for another tamal, don't judge, you're growing. Someone hands you a small clay figure, a maize god grinning, arms open. You carry him, the woman says. So you never forget who fed you. You nod because you won't. And as the feast winds down, the guests disperse like petals on a pond. You hold the little figure in your palm, warm, solid, humble. Just like the Chinampas, just like this world. Just like you, fed, seen, and softly floating in something far bigger than a meal. It begins with a rumble, not loud, not angry, just low, deep, and patient, like the sky clearing its throat. You look up from your canoe, brow furrowed. The clouds are gathering, bruised purple and heavy, curling over the Chinampas like someone pulling a blanket over a bed, and that's when you hear the whispers. Tlaloc is watching. They come from every direction, farmers, traders, a small child balancing a chicken on her head. Everyone's looking upward now, speaking his name with the kind of nervous respect usually reserved for teachers who grade in red ink. Tlaloc, god of rain, storms, and the general mood swings of the sky. You've seen his face before, carved into altars and painted on walls. Goggle eyes, jaguar fangs, and a grin that looks like he's always one thunderclap away from making your day very inconvenient. The Aztecs didn't just believe in Tlaloc, they depended on him, because Chinampas need water, but too much? Disaster. A flooded canal could rot roots, drown crops, and turn your careful planting into a very soggy regret. You pull your canoe under a low bridge just as the first raindrop splats against your forehead. Then another, then 1,000 more. It's not a drizzle, it's a declaration. The rain slaps the lake like it owes it money. The Chinampas shiver under the onslaught. You smell wet earth, ozone, and panic-brewed atoll. People scramble, pulling tarps over maize rows, moving canoes to higher ground, whispering prayers through gritted teeth. You take shelter under a willow. A woman stands beside you holding a clay bowl high above her head. She's whispering. The bowl is filled with frog figurines, flowers, and pieces of corn. She turns to you. This is his food, she says, so he doesn't take ours. You nod slowly, wondering if you should have brought snacks too. Tlaloc, it turns out, is a complicated god. On one hand, he brings life, rain for crops, fish to the canals, cool mornings after long dry spells. On the other, he's moody, and, if disrespected, he can withhold rain until maize curls in protest or drown an entire field out of spite. Aztec children were taught early, don't laugh during a storm, don't splash for fun, don't say his name, unless you mean it. One child, legend says, made a joke about Tlaloc's big nose and, well, let's just say that harvest season didn't go great that year. The rain falls harder. A priest in a white tunic wades into a canal, holding a torch that somehow stays lit. He chants something that sounds like wind, trying to remember a song. Behind him, others pour offerings into the water, cacao, flowers, feathers, even a small jade bead. The priest raises his hands, then silence. For a moment, the rain pauses, like it's thinking. Then it softens, slows, becomes mist. You exhale, so does everyone else. Across the Chinampas, people emerge from shelter. They inspect their crops, adjust their baskets, laugh quietly, as if still under observation. You step back into your canoe and float down a now glittering canal. The rain has left a mirror on everything, leaves, petals, even the feathers of a duck who looks mildly offended. You think about Tlaloc and how gods in this world aren't distant, perfect beings. They're family, moody uncles, grumpy aunts, hungry children. You don't worship them with gold. You feed them, talk to them. Apologize when you forget. You turn a corner and see a boy kneeling beside a flooded row of beans. He sighs, then gently lifts each stem, shaking the water off like a barber with wet hair. He hums as he works, not a sad tune, just soft, respectful. Like he knows the rain wasn't meant to punish, it was just a little dramatic. The sky clears, birds return, and from somewhere in the distance, a child giggles and immediately slaps a hand over their mouth. Wise, you paddle on, dripping content. Because today you've seen something that's hard to explain with numbers or science, a garden that negotiates with the sky, a people who don't conquer nature but converse with it, and a God who, if given a decent bowl of frogs and flowers, might just let your corn sleep dry tonight. The air is thick again, but not with rain. This time it hums with heat. The kind of sticky warmth that clings to your skin and makes even the frogs too tired to croak. You drift lazily down a narrow canal, half dozing, when a splash jolts you upright. Your canoe rocks. You look around, and then you see it, just beneath the surface, gliding silently. A crocodile. No, wait. Not quite. It's smaller, sleeker. Its snout flicks just above the water, its tail trailing like a shadow. A child nearby sees it too and yells, "Aquidal, water beast!" Another splash. You spin around, heart thudding like a festival drum. And then someone starts laughing. It's a man sitting in a canoe shaped like a bird, legs dangling lazily over the edge. He's pointing at your face, barely breathing from amusement. "That's not a crocodile," he says. "That's Marisol. She's lived here longer than most of us." You blink. Marisol? Turns out she's a local legend. A giant old turtle so big and cranky that children use her as an excuse to skip chores. But back in the day, before turtles were amusing and axolotls were endangered, this canal was crawling with stories. Some were real. Some were whispered into the reeds on nights when the fog was too thick and the stars too quiet. Take, for example, the tale of the canoe that vanished. A fisherman paddled too deep into the marsh where the water turned cold even in summer. He never came back, but sometimes at dawn, people say they see his canoe gliding silently across the surface. No paddle, no man, just soft ripples, or the story of the flower that sings. They say that once a year, a rare lily blooms under a willow where two lovers once drowned. If you sit quietly and close your eyes, you'll hear a hum. If you hum back, you'll dream of your first love. If you ignore it, you'll forget them. You paddle on, eyes scanning the water for singing plants and mischievous turtles. Eventually, you reach a wider canal where a small group of children are playing on a raft. One of them wears a crocodile mask made of painted bark and howls at the sky, trying to scare the others. "Don't fall in," one girl warns. "That's where the jaguar fish lives." The others gasp, and you lean in. Apparently, it's a fish as big as a canoe with yellow spots and teeth like obsidian. It only comes out when someone lies. You immediately become very careful about what you think. You smile, because here the Chinampas aren't just fields. They're chapters in an endless book. Each plot of land holds not just crops, but creatures, memories, and warnings. As the children splash and chase, an elder sits nearby under a reed shade, carving something into wood. You paddle closer. It's a mask, half jaguar, half fish. "You believe in these stories?" you ask. He shrugs. "They believe in us." He holds up the mask to the light. The grain catches the sun, revealing tiny carvings. Turtles, reeds, waves, and a tiny canoe with no one inside. "You think it's silly," he says, not unkindly. "But tell me, did you flinch when you saw the shadow in the water?" You nod. He smiles. Then it's real enough. And you realize the truth here isn't about proof. It's about participation. These stories about turtles named Marisol, ghostly canoes, jaguar fish with lie detectors, they don't need to be fact-checked. They just need to be remembered, because they keep the children from wandering too far. They keep the old from feeling too forgotten. They keep the Chinampas alive in more ways than one. As you drift back through the shaded canals, you spot something new. A line of wooden masks hung like laundry across a willow, each one different, some fierce, some foolish, one clearly shaped like a duck. They spin gently in the wind, warding off monsters, or maybe inviting them in for dinner. Either way, you're not afraid anymore. Because here, in the floating gardens of mist and memory, the monsters have names, and that makes them a little less scary. And maybe even kind. It comes not with thunder or drums, but a quiet kind of panic. A rumor, first, whispered by a farmer pulling weeds from his chinampa, then repeated by a merchant poling her canoe toward the market, then shouted by a boy running barefoot, eyes wide. The water is too high. You feel it too. Your canoe rides slightly higher than usual. The Chinampa banks seem a little less smug in their dryness, and the air, it's dense. Not storm-heavy like Tlaloc's tantrums, but warm, wet, and strangely still. You reach a field of maize, or rather, you reach where it should be. Instead, you find rows of green stalks half drowned, their leaves drooping like wet flags. The canal has spilled into the crops, soaking the soil beyond what it can bear. And worse, some Chinampas further out, gone, submerged entirely. You step out of the canoe, ankle deep in mud, and see the farmers gathering. No shouting, no blame, just action. One begins digging a trench to drain the water. Another unrolls a bundle of reeds to reinforce a bank. A woman scoops fish from a flooded squash patch, tossing them gently back into the canal. It's chaos, but coordinated. This isn't their first flood, and it won't be their last. You follow a narrow trail to higher ground, where an elder sits with a bundle of herbs and a face like old bark. She's making tea for fever, already expecting illness to follow the flood. Children run past with buckets, hauling water away, their feet splashing and slipping. No one tells them to stop. No one needs to, because here, disaster is a season, not a surprise. You notice something. Along the edge of each Chinampa, near the willows, someone has planted flowers, marigolds, lilies, wild herbs. At first, you thought they were for decoration. Now you realize they're indicators. If the water touches the base of the marigolds, it's too high. If the lilies begin to float, the roots are in danger. And if the willows sag, well, it's time to paddle, not plant. Suddenly, a cough breaks the air. A child, maybe 8, sits shivering under a reed canopy, eyes glassy as skin hot. His mother wipes his forehead with a damp cloth and feeds him tea from a clay cup. You glance around and realize more children are sick. The flood hasn't just drowned crops. It's stirred up disease. You remember stagnant water, mosquitoes, mold, all things that like to sneak in behind a good soaking, but they're ready. A priestess arrives with bundles of dried herbs, epizot for the belly, hoja santa for breathing, crushed chili paste for poultices. She speaks softly to the mothers, showing them how to grind, to boil, to pray. You sit beside a woman whose chinampa is now a soggy raft. She smiles anyway. We plant again, she says. The soil will forgive us. And you believe her. Because this isn't resilience born of denial, it's design. The Chinampas weren't made to resist water. They were made to dance with it. Their raised beds, reed borders, and soft banks all shift, soak, drain, and recover. The plants that survive get stronger. The soil that floods grows richer. Even the fish come back hungrier, fatter, and in the meantime, they heal each other. You watch as one man carves a canoe from a fallen tree, the old one lost in the flood. Another woman sings as she replants maize in the driest row she can find. A young boy chases ducks back to their pen. Most of them just waddle into the wrong Chinampa and pretend it's theirs. You laugh, and for a moment, everything feels normal again. Because in this world, loss isn't the end, it's a shift. A seized tilt in the cycle. A season with sharp teeth, sure, but a season all the same. The sun emerges by late afternoon. The water begins to retreat, and you, still muddy to the shins, sit beside a child weaving new reed mats for a future flood. No complaints, no fear, just readiness, because when the land floats, it learns to bend, not break. Evening again, this time with no rain, no flood, no feast, just stillness. The kind that slips in after the last paddle has docked, after the ducks have stopped arguing, and even the frogs have decided to call it a night. You drift past a chinampa, cloaked in twilight. Something moves, not fast, not loud, just a rustle between rows of maize. You hold your breath, thinking, raccoon? Snake? Nope. It's two people, heads ducked, hands brushing in the soil, hearts fluttering loud enough to scare the insects. You pause the canoe, not to spy, okay, maybe a little, but because the scene feels familiar. It's young love, and here, it grows like everything else, quietly, tentatively, among the vegetables. They don't see you. They're too caught in the moment. She's pulling weeds, but glancing sideways. He's pretending to inspect a squash vine, but mostly just breathing very carefully. You see it. The shy smile when their fingers touch. The way he hands her a small bunch of marigolds, like it's the first bouquet ever given. No grand declarations. No serenades, just soft gestures made of mud and moonlight. They sit on the edge of the chinampa, feet dangling into the canal. No words, just the kind of silence that doesn't need filling. Turns out, the chinampas weren't just for food, they were for finding each other. You ask around the next day, quietly, and people smile, knowingly. Old women giggle behind their hands. One man tells you, all of us met someone between the maize. There's even a word in Nahuatl, Telachotla, which means to love, but carries undertones of care, of tending, like a garden, because here, love isn't loud. It doesn't arrive with trumpets. It sprouts, patient and fragile, needing sun, water, and space to root. You hear stories of couples planting together each spring, their rows of maize curved slightly inward so their crops grew toward each other, of young lovers sneaking across chinampas at night, canoe paddles wrapped in cloth to avoid the splash of detection, of secret messages left in bundles of herbs, chili for desire, cacao for sweetness, and a single squash blossom for I'm yours. You meet an elder couple who still tend a chinampa. Together, she harvests, he fishes. They argue about ducks, laugh at each other's back pain, and call each other mushroom, apparently an endearment in Nahuatl that translates loosely to, you're small, strange, and I like having you around. One evening, they invite you to their floating porch. They serve tlacoyos filled with beans and nopals, sip pulque, and share the story of how they met. She was working her parents' chinampa. He crashed his canoe into her squash patch. She yelled. He blushed. They've been growing things together ever since. You smile, because suddenly you see it everywhere, in the way two farmers pass each other a little too slowly, in the way a girl tucks a flower into a boy's hair as he pretends not. To notice in the poems carved into the bark of willows, may my heart rest in your roots. The chinampas are covered in love, if you know how to look, and not just romantic love. There's love in the way a mother braids her daughter's hair with maize silk, in the way a grandfather teaches his grandson to paddle straight even though. They both zigzag like confused ducks, in the way the people speak to the land, calling it not the soil but tlali. Earth as mother, as companion, as co-conspirator. And you? You float through it all, quiet and still, heart softened like masa in warm hands, because here, love is not a thing shouted from rooftops. It's whispered into seeds, pressed into tortillas, woven between rows of beans and squash. And if you listen closely, if you slow down just enough, you'll hear it in the hush between paddles, in the pause before dusk, in the way one person looks at another when they think no one's watching. You paddle on, the night wrapping itself around your shoulders, like a soft shawl, and in the distance you hear a flute, a single note held long and low, like a promise still ripening. You wake to the sound of voices you don't understand, Not the soft lull of Nahuatl, not the hum of farmers or the splash of children. These voices are sharp, metallic. New, you sit up in your canoe and see them, strangers, poling through the canals in long, awkward boats that creak like nervous teeth. Their clothes are wrong, stiff fabric, heavy boots. Their armor reflects the sun in shards, and the air around them smells like sweat and smoke and something else, something unsettling. You've drifted into a moment you didn't expect to find. The day the strangers came, the Aztecs had never seen men like these before. Pale-skinned, metal-covered, speaking in a language that chopped the air, instead of singing to it. Some said they came from across the ocean. Others whispered they were gods, tools, wrapped in thunder and greed. You know better. They came for gold. But they found gardens. At first, they didn't understand what they were seeing. They stared at the chinampas like illusions, poked at the floating beds, tasted the maize, and looked confused that something so beautiful could come from mud and reeds. You watch them frown at the absence of fences. One mutters something to another and gestures as if to say, "Whose land is this?" But that's the wrong question here, because in this world, the land is everyone's and no one's. It belongs to the water, to the roots, to the ancestors who whispered instructions into seeds. You drift quietly, unnoticed, but the people of the Chinampas, they notice. They stand along the banks, not with spears, but with silence. Women tighten their shawls. Children are ushered into canoes and floated to safer corners. A priest adjusts the feathers in his headdress with fingers that don't quite stop shaking. One man, proud and calm, steps forward. He carries a basket of tortillas and a cup of chocolate spiced with chili. He offers them to the newcomers. They laugh. They eat. But they don't understand. They see food, not offering. Land, not memory. Opportunity, not responsibility. Still, the Chinampa people welcome them, for now. They are, after all, used to negotiating with storms, but the unease lingers like smoke from a fire you can't see yet. You visit the market at Tlatelolco, and it's not the same. The usual bustle has dulled into cautious murmurs. Some vendors are gone, some crops look untouched. A boy is carving a jaguar into a reed mat, not playfully but with clenched jaws. The strangers have brought mirrors, glass, cold and clean. The locals peer into them, frowning. One girl giggles, then stops, as if realizing something too large for words. At a nearby Chinampa, a woman teaches her daughter how to pack seeds in a gourd for hiding. Not storing, hiding. You ask why. In case, she says, just that, in case. You paddle on, past fields that now grow in half silence. You notice flowers planted closer together, herbs bundled tighter, offerings more frequent. They're preparing, and yet life continues. A boy teaches his dog to balance on the canoe's bow. A girl whispers a love poem into the water. A grandfather plants squash as though it's the first time, as though it's always been the first time. Because here's the thing, even when empires approach with fire and iron, the Chinampas float. Even when the language of war enters the canals, the maize still grows. Even when strangers mistake generosity for weakness, the earth keeps remembering how to feed. You pass a floating altar that wasn't there before. It holds a turtle shell filled with water, a clay frog, and a single blue corn kernel, a prayer or a defense, or both. As the sun begins to set, you hear one of the newcomers exclaim in awe at the sunset reflected in the canal. You almost pity him, because what he sees is beauty. But what he doesn't know is this beauty will outlast him. The sun is lower now, sinking slow, like it knows it's the last one for this story. The canals are still, not empty, but quieter. Everything around you feels wrapped in gauze, like someone's turned the whole world down to a gentle hush. You drift past Chinampas that seem to breathe differently now. Their edges are worn, their willow roots a little thinner. The colors, Faded maybe, but not gone. Just softened by time. You're still here, but centuries have passed. Tenochtitlan is no longer an island capital. The gods, if they still walk these paths, do so in silence. But the Chinampas, some of them survived. Not all. Many were filled in, drained, forgotten under concrete and city maps. Their soil buried under parking lots and bus routes. Their canals turned into alleys, their fish long vanished, their songs nearly lost. But a precious few float on. Here, in the southern fingers of modern Mexico City, you find them again, ragged but alive. The canals are narrower, the traffic louder, but the fields, yes, the fields still bloom. Old men in straw hats paddle tourists through the water, singing songs too old for Spotify. Women with silver braids sell squash blossoms from wooden carts. A child sticky with tamarind candy chases a duck that almost certainly does not want to be chased. And under all of it, the same earth, the same rhythm, the same breath of the floating. Gardens. You visit one last Chinampa. It's not large, maybe the size of a backyard, but it has maize, beans, biscuits, squash. A clay bowl near the edge holds flower petals, salt, and a smooth stone that fits perfectly in your palm. A man waves at you from across the canal. He's young, maybe in his 30s, but his eyes are old in the best way. He gestures for you to come ashore. You sit on a low bench as he brews something herbal over a small fire. He speaks quietly, like he's afraid to wake the soil. People think these are ruins, he says, but they're not. You look around at the reed mats, the soft rows of crops, the way the willow trees still lean protectively over the edges. No, you ask, he shakes his head. These are not ruins, he says, handing you a warm cup. They're roots. He smiles, and he's right. Because what you've seen, what you've felt, isn't a monument to something gone. It's a thread still, running through the fabric of the city, of the land, of time itself. A way of living that refused to die even when empires fell, even when roads rose, even when maps tried to erase the shape of the lake. The cup in your hands smells like mint and history. You sip, you listen, and you remember. You remember. The boy who offered you a frog whistle, the girl who launched a maize husk lantern into the dark, the elder who whispered to the compost, the lovers who grew toward each other like vines. They're still here, in every row of amaranth, in every splash of ore, in every breath of the earth that remembers being cradled by water. And you? You rise from the bench and walk back to your canoe, slow and reverent, like leaving a sacred room. You sit, you breathe, and you drift, not away, not this time, but with the water, back through the memory of Tenochtitlan, past the ghosts of the great. Feast, past the altar to Tlaloc, still damp with dew, past the laughter of children, still echoing between rows of squash, until all that remains is the sound of the paddle dipping, the wind sighing, the willow leaves brushing against the edge of sleep, and in that stillness, one final voice. Maybe the land, maybe just your own. Heart says softly, float slow, feed what you love, and always return to the roots. Now close your eyes. The Chinampas will hold you. The stories will remember you. The water is quiet now. So are you. Let it be. End of script. Sweet dreams. You shuffle into the quiet room. No phone ringing, no incoming emails. Just your breathing and the sound of a paper door quietly closing behind you. Maybe it's paper, maybe it's wood, maybe it's both. You touch the surface, smooth as a cicada's wing, yet as solid as a soldier's shield, leaning against a northern winter. No, you're not dreaming. And no, this isn't the kind of paper you crumpled up in frustration after misspelling accommodate for the 4th time. Hanji, paper. The name alone is as light as a breath. But don't be fooled. This paper doesn't tremble like the white paper babies you use to print your CVs. It survived monsoons, floods, fallen dynasties, and even heartbroken artists who used it to write 17 poems in a row in one night. You sit down, feeling your body slow down, as if every muscle in your body is asking to hear the story. A very old story. So old that if you say it out loud, you might raise the dust of time like light smoke. Remember the crocodile poop sunscreen? Yeah, that was ancient Egypt. Paper is different. In Asia, people have their own way of making things from tree bark. Gently, meticulously, patiently, like making rice cakes with bare hands in the spring. And in the Korean peninsula, they don't just make paper to write on. They make a living thing out of wood, bark, spring water, and a little bit of magic. Do you hear the sound of running water? Far away, like a stream in the woods that you only find when you're lost. That's where hanji comes from. No whirring machines, no assembly lines, just hands, and paper mulberry trees. An odd name for a tree that has no mulberry leaves, but can produce paper that holds water like clay. Yes, holds water. You might be thinking of a paper coffee cup that leaks at the bottom after 20 minutes. Hanji doesn't. It holds oil, medicine, and once, bulletproof. Not against the cold stare of a boss, but actual bulletproof. But we're not there yet. Now lean back, gently. Everything will come slowly. You don't have to run after it. Breathe in. The paper has no scent, but hanji smells good. Not like a lemongrass room spray, but like the memory of a wooden bookstore located in an alley that time forgot. You don't need to get up, no need to hurry. We're simply drifting a little further. The world where hanji begins is not the world you're in now. There, winter isn't just a season, it's part of the paper-making plan. And a tree that doesn't bear mulberries is treated like treasure. The paper mulberry. A name that sounds like a prank, but there's no joke here. You close your eyes and you find yourself on a quiet hillside. A cold wind brushes past, rustling the leaves that have just let go. An old man bends down, gloved hands gently harvesting branches at just the right age. Not rushed, not greedy, just perfectly timed, like a clock that never ticks wrong. See? No buzzing saws, no angry engines. Everything unfolds like an old song. The mulberry's trunk isn't thick, but it's resilient. Once cut, it's taken, to be soaked and stripped. That outer bark, pale, smooth, flexible, is the soul of hanji, though you wouldn't know that if you touched it. At first, it feels like an oversized noodle, limp, odorless, and so you'd be wrong again. They rinse the bark in mountain spring water, not just any water. It must be from the source, so clear you can see the clouds bowing over it. The artisan sits by the stream, thin fingers lifting each fiber out like catching strands of light. Each strip is a life, a memory of mountain, air of spring's breath, of nights the wind whispered things you've never heard. Think it ends here? Not quite. We've only just touched the door. The rinsed bark is steamed. Yes, like dumplings, but not to eat, to loosen the microscopic threads hiding in every strip, like pulling a single hair from cashmere without disturbing a thing. No yanking, no rushing, just steam and time. And you, listening now, feel yourself dissolving gently into the layers. Paper is not dead matter. Hanji is not a disposable thing. It's a symphony made of forests, streams, wind, and hands. And you, right now, are beginning to hear that song. Even if not a single note has played yet, you're still here, quiet, soft as mist. Your shoulders have eased, your wrists no longer tense. Now all you need to do is listen. Once the steamed bark is softened, like opening a bathroom door on a foggy winter morning, the artisan moves to the next step, boiling. Not for soup, though the cauldron and rising steam might remind you of chicken hot pot. But no, this is a meal for paper. You won't need chopsticks. The bark is placed into a large copper pot, along with natural lye, ash from burned chestnut, shells or rice straw, no chemicals, just what the earth and forest gave. The fire below doesn't roar. It hums gently, like a thought never spoken. The artisan watches the pot as if reading a secret from 100 years ago. You see now, this isn't a process. It's a ritual. Layer by layer, the bark changes color, softens, begins to dissolve into fibers. But if you cook it too fast, too hot, it falls apart, like overcooked instant noodles. But if you're patient, truly patient, the fibers bloom, sparkling like the silver hair of time. Then comes another wash, not because it's dirty, but to clear away what the eyes can't see: ash, debris, the unnecessary. This rinse is colder. Hands dip into water, wringing slowly, as if soothing the quiet ache of bark just leaving the fire. And then the wet fibers are laid onto a stone slab and beaten, yes, beaten, with a large wooden mallet, rhythmically, not fast, not slow. 1, 2, 3, each strike like a distant drum from within a dream. It feels like someone's knocking on the door of another world. But no, they're freeing the fiber, loosening it, opening it, until it becomes a paste, smooth, elastic, and tender as trust, something you too might need to work on with your own metaphorical mallet. And finally, after hours, sometimes a whole day, the artisan looks into the pulp and smiles quietly. Not for anyone, just for themselves. The pulp now resembles thick cream, silky, flowing, no clumps, not rushed, not lazy, not pretending. Can you see it now? An entire universe preparing to become a single sheet of paper. And you, still here, still listening, light as the very first wind of spring. You're still listening. Awake enough not to drift off, but calm enough not to care about anything else. That curious state, like floating inside a dream you wrapped yourself in with silk. Now you have the pulp, soft, smooth, yielding. But it's not hanji yet, not a true sheet of paper. It needs something else, a connection, a tiny bit of magic, and of course, a touch of bitter cold. Can you believe it? Winter is the ideal season for making paper, not spring when flowers bloom, not summer when sunlight is sold in sunscreen commercials. No, winter, cold, pale, and apparently uneventful. But for hanji, it's the season of perfection. Picture this: a quiet room with wooden doors on 3 sides, a stone floor that keeps no secrets. Outside, snow falls in silence. Inside, an artisan stirs a large tub of water, the pulp swirling like fog in milk. Then, a strange addition: hibiscus sap. Yes, you heard right. A little sticky extract from the hibiscus plant, something once used as natural shampoo. But here, it becomes the glue for dreams. When stirred into cold water, it keeps the fibers suspended. No sinking, no clumping, just floating. Like you, right now. And the water must be cold, truly cold. The kind that bites your fingers, though. The pulp, strangely, seems to smile. The colder it gets, the more elastic the fibers become. Softer, easier to move without tangling. Winter, it turns out, is a background dancer no one claps for. The artisan dips a bamboo screen into the vat, then begins to shake it, lightly, rhythmically, not up and down, not in circles, but in a subtle diagonal sway, as if inviting the smooth fibers to form neat rows, and they obey. You wouldn't see anything special at first glance. But if you waited patiently, like a melting icicle, you'd notice each shake is a silent adjustment, a hand-drawn blueprint, a breath of craft. Each layer of fiber weaving into the next, finer than hair, smoother than a baby's cheek. And somehow you feel warm. That's right. In the heart of the coldest season, a sheet of paper begins to form from cold water, from tree, from sap, from bare hands. And you? You're still there, toes tucked under a soft blanket, listening to winter do all this quiet work for humans without ever asking to be paid. You're still here, weightless, like steam rising off a forgotten cup of tea. No one's rushing, and neither are you. After the bamboo screen has been shaken just right, the pulp fibers settle into a thin, even layer. The artisan lifts the screen gently, tilts it slightly, and the excess water runs off like a whisper at the end of a long day. What's strange is, this freshly formed sheet is still incredibly fragile. If you touch it, it might tear. If you exhale too hard, it might fly away. But if you look, really look, you'll see something forming, something very close to patience, incarnate. Now comes the transfer. The sheet must be moved onto a wooden panel, not by hand, but with a swift flip, as if they're playing a quiet game of pancake. No splash, no sound. You blink and the sheet is already there, resting flat, as though it had always been there, waiting for you to notice. But it's still wet, very wet, like you after a surprise rain without an umbrella, and it can't stay like that. The sheet must dry, but not with a hairdryer or a fan or a miraculous microwave. The ancient Koreans had a warmer idea. You follow the artisan into another room. At the center is a large furnace, not glowing red, not crackling, just quietly alive, like a grandmother's palm. Atop the furnace sits a wide copper plate, polished so smooth you can see your reflection. Slightly warped, but still you one. By one, the wet sheets are placed on the copper surface, slowly, deliberately, as if laying slices of memory onto a miniature sun. Then, they use the palm of their hand to smooth them down. No cloth, no tool, just skin and warmth. A motion, both familiar and distant, like someone gently pressing the creases out of a crumpled dream. You can hear it drying if you listen closely. A whisper of steam, a hush, like snow melting, like the sound of a fresh shirt being ironed, like... Oh, well, you can imagine. When the sheet is dry, it's lifted and stacked onto others, one by one. No fuss, no complaint. And just like that, paper is born, not as a product, but as a whispered greeting. You look at the stack, no words, no lines, just blank sheets. But they carry winter and fire and sap and those silent hands. And in a way, they carry you too. Have you ever thought of paper as a place to live? Not for words, but for spirits? Now you sit before a stack of dried hanji sheets. Thin, ivory-colored. There's something in that hue that reminds you of an old temple wall, the kind of wall where sunlight lowers its voice. And maybe that's not too far from the truth. Hanji was never meant for grocery lists or fast food wrappers. From the beginning, it was reserved for the sacred. For things too important to trust to paper that cracks, curls, or forgets. Picture yourself stepping into a remote mountain monastery. The scent of incense brushes past your face like a polite hello. The wall in front of you, not plaster, not paint, but layers of hanji pressed smooth onto stone, forming a skin that keeps out the cold wind of the mountain. You touch this wall gently, and the paper shifts under your fingers, as if it's breathing, not decorative, protective, holding warmth, whispering that what's fragile can also shield. Hanji was used to paint Buddhas, to copy sutras, to craft lanterns that float in the night. Not because it was cheap, but because it was strong. Funny, isn't it? The lighter something is, the longer it seems to last, like affection. Weightless, but unwilling to leave. Even windows were patched with it. You might chuckle. Paper on a window? But in a hanok house, where every part breathes and every crack is a passage for wind, hanji doesn't just block. It filters. It softens the light. It teaches the breeze to behave. And every afternoon sunlight would pass through it, casting a golden hue like salted egg yolk. You're no longer sure if you're hearing a story or dreaming one. But you remember that light. You remember the scent of wood, the rustle of a sacred page turning. And you understand, some things only live when a quiet paper agrees to hold them. You've never seen papers so respected, not just in books, not just on walls, but on a king's head. And no, it wasn't a joke. Hanji was used to make the ceremonial headpieces worn by Joseon kings. Not ordinary paper, but lacquered hanji, pressed in layers, shaped into authority itself. a crown born from pulp, lighter than gold, yet just as commanding. A reminder that sometimes rule doesn't need to weigh heavy to be real. You grin. Really? A king with a paper crown? But then again, haven't you worn dreams on your head too? And then you hear the drum, a low ancient sound, echoing like the heartbeat of the earth. Inside its skin, you guessed it, was Hanji. Dried, oiled, and stretched across the frame like a second layer of life. It doesn't just endure the impact, it deepens the sound. Every beat is a dialogue between wind and wood, and Hanji, of course, is the quiet interpreter, but there's more. Hanji was once used for shoes, not as tough as leather, but light, breathable, enough to get you through a spring. People even made raincoats out of it. Imagine wearing something misty white, weightless, that doesn't let water in, like walking through the world without collecting its dust. You begin to see Hanji like an old friend, always around, never complaining, capable of everything, from signs, hats, drums, to folding fans. And when it had nothing to prove, it became the wrapping for a proposal doll or a vessel for love letters. A material that speaks nothing but understands everything. You touch the nearest sheet. It doesn't shout. It doesn't show off. But you know, it's heard so many vows, so many regrets, so many forgotten songs. And you wonder, what else in the world does that? Do you remember? The last time you really sat down and touched a piece of paper, not to sign, not to toss, but just to feel. Hanji began to disappear from daily life like an old friend no one had time to say goodbye to. People forgot it, the way we forget poems without hashtags or afternoons without Wi-Fi. Because suddenly everyone wanted things faster, lighter, cheaper, no matter how long they lasted. A plastic factory rose near the river where paper mulberry bark once soaked. The smell of chemicals drowned out the scent of leaves. And Hanji, still needing time, still needing hands, still needing sunlight, could no longer keep up with a world run by buttons and seconds. You see children drawing on tablets. Their fingers no longer know the scent of damp paper, no longer know how to wait for a sheet to dry. They draw quickly, beautifully, but in a hurry, and nothing stays when the image vanishes with a tap. You imagine holding a box of old Hanji. Each sheet seems to have its own memory, a fold here, a bump there, a thread that didn't quite lie flat. And somehow, your heart softens, like hearing an old song, slow but in perfect rhythm with your breath. Hanji didn't vanish, it just stepped back, like an oil lamp in the corner of the room, still burning, but ignored. It didn't scream, it didn't beg, it waited, because it knew anything that once held a human soul will eventually be needed again. You exhale gently. In the dark you hear a soft rustle, the sound of a Hanji sheet being turned after years of sleep. And you wonder, if you touch it again, would you remember how to touch yourself? Have you ever heard the snip of scissors in a small room where light filters through a Hanji-covered window? That's where you are now. A modest workshop, so small that turning around too quickly might knock over a drying sheet of bark. But there's something different about this place. No machines, no noise, just hands and water. You watch an artisan, not young, gently stir pulp in a wooden vat. The motion is slow, deliberate, like he's not just mixing fibers, but blending time itself into each thread of bark. Every Hanji sheet here takes a week to be born. Soaking, beating, straining, drying, pressing. Each step a whispered prayer, done not out of habit, but out of respect. No one rushes, no one yells, no one says, "Hurry!" You quietly observe and suddenly remember how your grandmother used to fold shirts, slow, aligned, tender, as if the fabric had feelings. You wonder why these artisans still do it. Maybe because they know something the world has forgotten. When you make something with both hands without asking for anything back, it outlives you. Hanji is coming back, not in malls or flashy ads, but in paper-making workshops tucked in. Old villages, in handwritten letters from keyboard-weary souls, in the thin sheets pasted on doors to hush meditation room, and you realize, yes, this feels right. Like the world, after spinning too fast, is gently tilting its head to listen to what a quiet piece of paper has to say. You probably think, traditional paper belongs in a museum, quiet, behind glass, with a little sign that says, "Do not touch." But Hanji, it's whispering in places far louder than you'd expect. In a European concert hall, a luthier is hunched over a violin, not using synthetic glue. But Hanji, this paper lets sound breathe through it, like wind through silk leaves. It's strong, yet delicate, light enough not to disrupt resonance, tough enough to endure a century of music. You hear a note glide through the air, like a ribbon falling into water. Somewhere inside that violin, Hanji lies quietly, holding the sound without holding the spotlight. But that's not all. Hanji is quietly working in restoration labs. When people mend cracked paintings or fragile manuscripts, they don't reach for plastic. They reach for Hanji, light, neutral, and willing to disappear once the job is done. You may not see it, but it's there, beneath the fresco, behind the book's repaired page, like the best storyteller, never stealing the light, only making sure the story is heard. And perhaps the strangest twist, Hanji is now protecting microchips. Yes, in a world of metal and silicon, engineers wrap delicate circuits in Hanji to keep them dry, flat, cool, an ancient sheet of paper guarding the brain of tomorrow. You exhale softly. It doesn't feel out of place, not at all. Maybe you just hadn't looked at it the right way. Hanji isn't reclaiming fame, it's just working, quietly, persistently. A bridge between then and now, made of paper but never breaking. You pass through a wooden gate, so old it no longer creaks, only sighs when the wind slips through its cracks. In front of you, a small house with roof tiles, like ocean waves. And then, a face, an old artisan, eyes the color of soaked bark, sits on the steps. He doesn't greet you, doesn't need to. He nods, gently. You know you're not a guest. You've simply wandered into a place where time forgot to move on. You sit beside him. No words. Just a shallow tray of water between you, with pale mulberry fibers floating like small clouds. He stirs, again, slowly, as if he's not stirring paper pulp, but memory. You ask if he's tired, making paper like this every day. He just smiles, a crease of a smile, like the quiet folds in old Hanji, not obvious, but always there. He tells you that paper doesn't matter because it's beautiful or strong. It matters because while making it, you can't lie, you can't hide haste, you can't fake care. Each layer shows everything. A soft mirror, you look at his hands, not smooth, not straight, but every finger holds a memory, every nail a quiet sentence, every callus a season, and suddenly you realize Hanji doesn't survive through technique. It lives because someone still listens deeply enough to hear it breathe. A younger person steps out from inside the house. They bow to the elder. No words, just a shift. The younger begins stirring. The elder rises. Every motion like a silent dance. No audience, no spotlight. Yet you know you're witnessing something sacred. You don't know how long Hanji will last. But as long as someone still folds it under the sun with care, maybe the world still has space for what's gentle. You stand in a white room, no chairs, no windows, just pale, cool light spilling from above onto a moving figure. A woman, wrapped in sheets of Hanji so thin, they shimmer like breath. Not a dress, not a costume, not anything you've seen before. She moves slowly. Each gesture stirs the air, and Hanji rustles like pages stirred by wind. Her body and the paper are not separate. They breathe together. A tear in the paper, and you see a wound, not fabric. No one speaks, but you understand. This is not performance, it's a whisper, something ancient, wearing a very new face. Another artist appears. On the wall he's painting, not with ink, but by tearing, layering, and pressing Hanji into form. The wall becomes a memory, familiar, fractured, like someone trying to stitch together all they've lost without. Hiding the seams, you see Hanji now, no longer in need of protection. It's not background, it is the voice, delicate but not weak, quiet but not invisible. And strangely, the further it moves from tradition, the more it becomes itself. It once held words, now it holds silence. Once a backdrop, now the art. Once a wall covering, now the house. You realize Hanji doesn't need its past to survive. But when artists touch it, the past doesn't vanish. It simply changes shape. Into a layer, a motion, an idea. You step back into the corner of the room. The lights begin to dim. The dancer stands still. A piece of Hanji slips from her shoulder, drifting to the floor without sound. But you hear it clearly. Hanji just said something, very soft, like breath passing through a throat and disappearing. You leave the white room, stepping out into the street. It's not quite dark, but the light has stopped saying much. Everything feels wrapped in a thin, gray hush. Not day, not night, just between. You hear cars, footsteps, someone talking on the phone too fast. But all the noise feels distant, like it's happening underwater. Hanji is still with you, not as paper, but as something unnamed. You sit on a bench. Your fingers slip into your coat pocket, not looking for anything, just habit. But you touch paper, a small sheet. You don't remember putting it there. It's blank. You hold it. Just look. The surface is slightly rough, the edge gently curled, like it's already lived a short life in your pocket. You think of writing something, but the pen pauses just above the page because suddenly you feel it. Maybe a paper doesn't need to be written on to mean something. Maybe it just needs to exist. An invitation, a quiet space, a possibility. You think of Hanji. Centuries of soaking, beating, drying, pressing. Then years of stillness, in books, in walls, in instruments. Then suddenly on a stage, breathing with a dancer. Each time, different, but always Hanji. You exhale, softly, as if not to tear something unseen. You realize you no longer see paper the same way. It's not a surface for quick notes, not a disposable thing. It's a door to somewhere you haven't stood yet. You don't write, you simply fold the paper, gently, like someone once folded Hanji in the sun, and you tuck it back into your pocket, not to keep, but to remember. Sometimes the most important thing is the space left open. You slow down, not because you're tired, but because there's nothing left to hurry for. Your steps lead you to a small hill where an old house rests quietly among the trees. The wooden door hangs slightly ajar. You push it open. No creak, no greeting. Just the smell of aged wood, long-held sun. And paper. The walls are lined with Hanji, faint yellow, like late afternoon light. You touch it. Cool at first, then warm, as if the house is still breathing even though no one lives here now. You imagine living here. No internet, no alerts. Just tea in the morning, birds at noon, books at dusk. Hanji says nothing, but you feel it understands. Even what you haven't said. You sit by the window. Outside, the forest begins to blur. Branches lose their edges, melt into soft gray. Shapes. You imagine each wall, each door frame, each quiet corner. All of them once held stories, held sighs. You step out onto the porch and look up. The sky isn't dark, just indigo, fading. No stars, no moon, just wind. You remember Hanji once became armor in funerals, skin for traditional puppets, canvas for woodblock prints. Once touched by the fingers of scholars, monks, mothers, craftsmen. Once held the names of the living and the gone. Once held what no one else could. You stand still, not thinking anymore, just there. A moment that doesn't need to mean anything. And you somehow know Hanji doesn't need praise, just stillness. A place with soft light. And someone willing to stop and listen, someone like you. You lie down, not on a bed, in your mind, as if your body is being gently folded, layer by layer, like a sheet of Hanji, light, slow, unhurried. You don't need to retell the story. Because the story has already told you, you remember the hands that made Hanji, none of them the main character, all quiet, all focused, all knowing that some things don't need to shine to last forever, like Hanji, and like sleep. Your breath slows. Each inhale brushes the air like it's brushing against a single sheet of paper. So soft you're not sure it's there. But you don't need to be sure anymore. You think of the fish swimming in a Hanji-lined vase, the fingertip resting on fresh ink. The altar where one thin sheet holds the name of someone gone, the dancer. In white, the Hanji slipping to the floor like a final exhale. You think of yourself, and then you stop thinking. All sounds begin to blend, like waves into shore, like ink in water, like dreams folding into each other with no clear start. And you're no longer lying on Hanji. You're lying in Hanji, as if your whole body is a line of handwriting, small, slow, sinking softly into a page that never needs to be filled. Again, everything is quiet now. From here on, no one needs to read. You just need to close your eyes and let the story end with the first breath of sleep. End of script. Sweet dreams.